Most of the media isn't talking about this, but I really do think it's important to keep the conversation going about Israel's right-wing government continuing to not only illegally occupy Palestinian territory, but commit human rights abuses against the Palestinians in Gaza. 1.8 million people in what I've heard Glenn Greenwald call essentially an open-air prison in Gaza. Palestinians continue to nonviolently protest their occupation, nonviolently for most reports, and Israeli forces continue to use force against them. Most notably, a few weeks ago, Israeli forces killed tens of Palestinian protesters and one journalist using live ammunition. And well, despite much international outrage, it seems like Israel hasn't backed out of their use of this brutality, or backed off. Shocker under this right-wing government, Haaretz reports. One Palestinian was killed and at least 170 Palestinians were wounded Friday as thousands participated in the March of Return along the Israel-Gaza border for the 5th week in a row, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Of the wounded, at least 45 of which by live Israeli fire, 4 were medical staff and 6 were journalists, reported the ministry. 2 of the wounded are said to be in critical condition. The organizers said that this week, too, the marches are supposed to remain a nonviolent mass protest. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, youth scattered sandbags in several locations along the border earlier this week for protection against sniper fire. 42 Palestinians have been killed and 5,511 were wounded in the mass protests since March 30th, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported on Tuesday. And Haaretz included a chart of the deaths and injuries from just March 30th, Palestinians demonstrating and protesting their right to live and live with dignity. And when I say live with dignity, the Israeli government isn't just mowing them down, these protesters, or depriving them of their dignity. They are also essentially poisoning them with this occupation, health-wise. A report by the United Nations says living conditions in the Gaza Strip have worsened in the 10 years since the territory was blockaded by Israel. The report says that key indicators identified in an earlier 2012 UN report, such as declining incomes, healthcare, education, and electricity, have deteriorated yet further. The report also finds that Gaza's only water source is predicted to be irreversibly depleted by 2020 unless immediate action is taken. When you're down to 2 hours of power a day and you have 60% youth unemployment rates, that unlivability threshold has been passed quite a long time ago, a UN spokesman said. And here's a separate report, Haaretz reporting again. Almost all of the drinking water in the Gaza Strip is impotable because of sewage pollution or high salinity levels, according to data presented last week by a hydrologist who advises the Palestinian Water Authority. Almost 90% of the drinking water in Gaza exceeds the maximum salinity standard of the World Health Organization and is expected to become even more saline in the years to come. Gaza's water supply has also been extensively contaminated by sewage. Some 70% of Gaza's homes are connected to the sewage system, but due to poor maintenance, much of that sewage seeps into the aquifer. As a result, the concentration of nitrates, which are indicators of contamination, has gone up. There are 2 high concentrations of either chloride or nitrates in 97% of the water supplied to the residents of Gaza. 97%. So the images of protesters and journalists being gunned down by Israeli forces is shocking in itself. But the casual brutality has been going on for a long time. And this is not to say that Hamas and Palestine doesn't deserve, some of the blame. It's 2 sides to every story. But again, look at this in context. One side, Israel, is occupying them and has the full monetary backing of the West, including the United States. The other side is starved for resources and allies and is just proportionately much less powerful. I think it's so important to talk about this because Israel influences in many ways so much of our foreign policy and what we decide to do internationally. Almost the entire reason the right is belligerent towards Iran is because of Israel. And it's crazy to me because we treat Israel the exact same no matter who is in power and leading their country. We bend to their will. No matter if it's a reasonable, more progressive prime minister like Ehud Barak back in the day, or if it's a right-wing corrupt neocon like Benjamin Netanyahu. The American government must remain, in the eyes of the corrupt people leading us, steadfast in their support of Israel, no matter who their leader is. Well, I say screw that. These Gaza conditions, water, electricity, etc., are enough to declare that situation in the Strip an absolute human rights crisis. We should in the United States. The deaths of journalists and protesters are just the most visceral example of that violence. They have, and I will repeat this, become an apartheid regime, blocking the Gazans from decent water, occupying them, not giving them good food or living conditions, and just, again, an endless occupation, shooting them if they get too close to the border. The Israeli government under Netanyahu doesn't want peace. They want eternal occupation, and the rest of the Western world, the United States included, has got to get on board and realize that, or will really be on the wrong side of history as these human rights abuses persist.